order, please. First order of business, any bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on. We're honored today to have by the way, all of the guests here, thank you for coming. I arranged for these donuts just for you. Don't tell the Register of Deeds I said that. But welcome to the committee. Thanks for coming. First, we're going to have informational briefing from Director Connie Owens from the Kansas Water Office. Welcome to the committee and thank you.
Am I on? Oh, thank you, Chairman Hyland, and thank you, committee, for allowing me to present to you again today. It's always a pleasure. And today, I am accompanied by Don Buehler, who's the chair of the Kansas Water Authority, and we're going to discuss with you today the Water Authority's annual report. And before we get into that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a status update on where we are with the Kansas Water Plan, which is a separate document. Just a little bit of background for refresher and for those that might be new. The Kansas Water Office, my office, one of our flagship responsibilities is to develop and implement the Kansas Water Plan. And that is a statutory obligation where we identify all the water needs all across the state, whether they are water quantity, water quality, surface water, groundwater, everything there is that we have to identify that needs some work, needs some help, needs some tweaking, boosting, funding, you name it, to help the citizens of Kansas have a safe, secure water supply. And we are required to update that water plan periodically, and my office has been involved with that update. We start, the process for that is a very grassroots process. As you might remember, we have regional advisory committees throughout the state that represent our different regional planning areas. And those regional advisory committees said they meet, they come up with goals and action plans that affect their particular area, and they share that information and recommendations with the Water Authority. The Water Authority, which Don is the chair of, is an advisory board of water-related individuals from across the state, most of whom are governor's appointees. One is an appointee of the Speaker of the House, one is an appointee of the President of the Senate. And these are true public servants. They don't get paid for what they do, and neither do our regional advisory committee members. But the Water Authority meets, and they partner with our state agency heads. The Water Authority is made up of these appointees who represent a wide variety of interests, from groundwater management districts to the public to municipalities. And they are partnered with non-voting members of the Water Authority who are our content experts, the agency heads from all the agencies that deal with water areas. All of these people bring their talents and their information to bear, and the Water Office uses their information. We partner, we coordinate, and we come up with an update of the Kansas Water Plan so that we have a roadmap for what we need to be doing for water for Kansas. It is a monumental effort, and so it does take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of back and forth because we allow different reviews and different drafts and comments. Last August, the Water Office presented the draft of the Kansas Water Plan to the Water Authority to approve it for public comment, which the Water Authority did do. So there is a draft out there that was open for public comment for several weeks. And we did, at the Water Office, we did receive a lot of public comment. And it was incredibly impressive, very thoughtful comments, very helpful comments, very important comments. And so my staff then reviews those comments and incorporates those where appropriate into the water plan to then provide a final version for the Water Authority to approve. By statute, the water plan is subject to the Water Authority's, the advisory board's approval. So where we are now is getting it ready to present to the Water Authority for them to vote and hopefully approve it and pass it as prepared. So that's, I might stop for just a moment and say, are there any questions so far about the water plan?
How often is the plan prepared?
Well, it should be every 5 years. And the every 5-year process got a little bit interrupted a while back with the directive from Governor Brownback to create the 50-year vision for water supply in Kansas. And that was another monumental document that involved public comments, public hearings, input, a tremendous amount of work by all water-related state employees all across the state and entities, interest groups, and they did create a 50-year vision document. So that sort of usurped being able to do the update of the water plan at that point. One thing I'll mention is that the current update of the water plan is incorporating aspects of the 50-year vision. So that we will have one guiding document, and particularly the one that is required by statute. So that's what we're working on right now. Also, another first with this upcoming water plan update is that we are including goals and action plans that were submitted by those regional advisory committees. So they have a more direct voice and visibility in the water plan than they have had before. So that's something that I'm pretty proud of, and I think the Water Authority is in support of. What I would mention to you, not to confuse you, but the document you have in front of you, the annual report, if you will refer to page, let me get it right. My pages jumped on me. If you'll refer to page 4, at the bottom of page 4, there is a reference to the update of the Kansas Water Plan in this annual report. And I would highlight for you that even though without the Water Authority's approval, I can't go into content regarding recommendations and all of that because the Water Authority hasn't put their seal of approval on that content yet. But I can point out to you the 5 guiding principles. These are the categories that the water plan has used as a structure to identify and address and make recommendations for our water issues. And those 5 categories, not necessarily in order of importance, conserve and extend the High Plains Aquifer, secure, protect, and restore Kansas reservoirs, improve the state's water quality, reduce vulnerability to extreme events, and increase awareness of Kansas water resources. So those are the 5 guiding principles that form the structure and the focus of the Kansas Water Plan. So before I move on to the annual report, any questions?
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I'm new to this, and I'm a little confused with all of the different agencies. Can you succinctly, without taking up everybody else's time, the Water Authority is the overriding authority from all of these different agencies that deal with water issues, or how's the best way to look at that? Or is there something in here that would explain that for me?
Thank you very much for asking that, because it's important to have that structure clearer. And yes, there are quite a few different agencies. There are 3 primary agencies that deal with water in Kansas, even though there are many more that are involved. The 3 primary ones, and the Water Authority is not over all of them in the sense that you're describing. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and Leo Henning has spoken to your group. They handle water quality issues, is the way to think about their role. The Division of Water Resources within the Department of Agriculture, which is headed by Chief Engineer Earl Lewis, and he has been here, He may be here behind me right now. They handle water quantity. They handle permitting who gets to use water. Those two agencies are regulatory. They issue permits, they enforce permit conditions, and the third main agency is the Kansas Water Office, where I am. That is in charge of planning, policy, coordination with the other water agencies. We are not regulatory. We don't permit or enforce anything. The Water Authority is an advisory board that is a part of my office, the Water Office. And their role is to be a voice from across the state, from all different interests and water needs and different geographical, hydrological situations, to be a voice to help guide state policy in terms of priorities. Their main, among other jobs, the Water Authority, the advisory boards group, is to make recommendations to the legislature and the governor on what our priorities should be. Remember, they approve the water plan. So the recommendations for what do we need to do about water is ultimately for the Water Authority to say. Their other incredibly important role is they make recommendations to the legislature and the governor for how to spend the state water plan fund, which we'll also be talking about today. And that is a dedicated fund to pay for the programs that are identified in the water plan. So the Water Authority also makes recommendations for the funding of that plan. So they make recommendations to the legislature and the governor for please put money in the fund, and they make recommendations for how that should be spent, because as you can imagine, there's nowhere near enough money to pay for everything, so you have to prioritize. Does that kind of help set the stage?
Yes, thank you very much. That's the best explanation I've heard. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I guess I'm off to a good start. Okay, all right. Then moving into the second topic that we're here to talk about, and Dawn Bueller will also be addressing this with me, is the annual report. And this is a statutory responsibility of the Water Authority. It is prepared by the Water Office staff, and it reports on what are the recommendations for funding, what are the kind of things we're recommending, what are these things you're talking about, what are these programs about, and it is a succinct sort of year-by-year caption of what are the recommendations as well as what have we accomplished in the last year. So what I'll do real quickly is just kind of give you an overview as to how to read this document, and then Dawn will talk to you a little bit more about the recommendations on the revenue and expenditure side of it. So if you would open your report and just kind of page through the first couple pages, you'll see that the first thing you see are budget charts. So these are reflective of what the Water Authority is recommending for the State Water Plan Fund. And to sort of refresh that a little bit, it will be easy to see what I'm going to say. If you look at page 3, all of those line items are with our recommendations. They're programs within the Kansas Water Plan, and the Kansas Water Authority has said, these are the things that we want funded in these amounts. They are actually implemented by 4 different agencies. So you'll see at the top, there's Health and Environment. So the Water Plan Fund pays for those listed programs that KDHE actually implements, Likewise, when you go to the next chunk below that, you'll see the Department of Agriculture. Those are all programs that the Department of Agriculture, Division of Water Resources, and Division of Conservation actually implement with state water plan funds. Likewise, the Water Office programs follow that. And the Department of Wildlife and Parks also has a program in there on aquatic nuisance species that the Water Authority is recommending be funded out of the State Water Plan Fund. And Dawn will explain a little bit more of that to you, but what I'd like you to know is every one of those line items is described in this booklet. So if you are to look at one of those and say, what in the world does it mean when it says water resources cost share? Well, you can look to the table of contents in the front and find the description of it in this book. Also, in addition to the explanation of what all those programs are and what they've accomplished in the last year, we also report on statewide water issues. There are some things that are just happening out there that you should be aware of and should be kept apprised of that don't relate directly back to the line items in the State Water Plan Fund. One of those is the Hayes R9 Ranch transfer that you heard about yesterday. So some of these issues are described in here to give you an update on what's going on with them, but they don't reflect back on those line item funding recommendations, if that makes sense. And with that, if there aren't any other questions at the moment, then I'm going to turn this over to Dawn to fill you in a little bit more.
I think we may have a couple questions.
Okay, great.
Representative Riley. Anybody online?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Budget-wise, when will, I see you have the 2021 actuals in here. How long into this year will it be until you have the actuals for 2022?
I knew my first question would be one I couldn't answer. Maybe there's, Lane, does anyone else know where that budget cycle is when FY 2022 is solidified? No. I'm sorry, I will certainly get you that information.
I think research may be able to explain.
Oh, thank you, Victoria.
For the record, Victoria Potts, Legislative Research. The state fiscal cycle ends on June 30th, 2022. It usually takes about a month for actuals to be finalized. So I would say in August, we'll have the actual expenditures for fiscal year 2022.
So the figures that are in there are fiscal, not calendar 2021. So those are the figures that ended June
Right.
of this last year.
Right.
Right.
And they were either actually spent or encumbered for FY 2021.
I understand encumbered.
Okay.
So it would have been nice comparison then to on your governor's recommendations to have that third column, because I had to go to this column to bring it over to here.
Right. Well, I think that that's a very good point, and we do have, and we can provide you with as many comparisons and data steps as you would like. We obviously have that. It was a little cumbersome to get all those lines into the annual report, and this extra handout we provided today because the annual report was published before the governor's recommendations. So this was just a quick way to compare what the Water Authority recommended with what the governor has since recommended. But I'm happy to get more of those details to you.
Right, but I agree. And since we're comparing apples to apples because of what's in the book, everything's aligned here, I think it would be nice for the committee anyhow to do a comparison to some actuals because there are some big jumps between actuals and then what you're asking for, that kind of thing. So.
One thing I will point out is on that chart on page 3, the middle column includes what was appropriated plus carry forwards. And we could break those out for you if that would also be helpful. Because some of that looks kind of big, but they weren't the actual appropriations, because with COVID, a number of programs could not go forward. So there were a number of carryover values with those. So, correct, which came from 21. Okay, great. We'll be happy to get that. I know we'll be getting into all those details for the budget hearings, and we'll get started early.
Further questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for your presentation so far. I know we've had a little bit of discussion about what the State Water Plan Fund can and cannot be used for. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about that, so we have a good understanding of that going into this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The statute that creates the State Water Plan Fund, which dates back to 1989, the Water Office, the Water Authority, predates all of that. The water plan predates all of that. But there was a point in time when the legislature wisely said, we better have as dedicated a fund as we can to pay for the programs that are identified in the Kansas Water Plan. So by statute, the State Water Plan Fund is only supposed to pay to implement those programs. In general, it is, and it says it is not to replace full-time FTEs. So in general, it's not supposed to support salaries, positions. There are instances in which to implement a program, you have to have staff if it's a program that's prioritized, for example, and it will take more time, or you don't have someone dedicated to that. Once in a while, there's had to have been salary connected with that, but it's supposed to be temporary and dedicated to that program. So it's not supposed to be for ongoing salaries, staffing, offices, that kind of thing. So it's supposed to be dedicated to implement the programs in the water plan. So thanks.
Just a quick follow-up to that. I know this is the first year that we received performance-based metrics from different agencies. Do you know when the KWA was making their budget recommendations, if those things were kind of considered? I know RACs contribute a lot to that as well, but didn't know if you had insight into that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, your mask is making it hard for me to understand your question. Although I appreciate your mask.
Yeah. Just clarifying, so I know this is the first year that we've had performance-based metrics for a lot of the agency budgets, and I was just wondering if the KWA considered some of those things when they were crafting the budget, or the budget recommendations anyway for the State Water Plan Fund, or if you have insight into that. Thank you.
Thank you. The metrics that have to be reported to the state that you're describing were not specifically part of the materials that were presented to the Water Authority to make their decisions. However, there's a parallel program that the Water Authority has created. The Budget Committee created, and then the full Water Authority approved, a performance-based budget guideline system where they have a set of guidelines that involve prioritizing, helping guide priorities. For example, is something required by an existing contract? Is something required by an existing statute? And there are a wide variety of considerations, balancing, factors. And one of them is the need to develop and require metrics so that the Water Authority does get accountability for the programs that they're recommending for funding. So the Water Authority itself is developing and seeking from the entities that get the funding, please show us what did you spend the money on and what were the outcomes that you received. So they use the same concept, but it's an internal one.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all this discussion on the expense side. I flipped your sheet over and looked at the revenues, or page 2 of the Water Authority report.
Yes, sir.
Page 2 of the Water Authority report gives the 21 actuals. And then the single sheet that you handed out has our estimates for the upcoming years. And I was just trying to look down through some of these receipts. The Kansas Water Plan has a great deal of fees which go toward that. I know a lot of times we're sitting here talking about state general fund.
Right.
But as I look at pesticide registration fees and fertilizer registration fees, that's about $5.7 million
Right.
in 21 actual. Can you explain those two fees and where they come from?
Well, I'm not sure that there may be others in the room that can explain those fees more specifically, but the intention of these various fees is to help provide the water that these interests need, as well as help address any problems or challenges that may be created by them. But it's not supposed to just go into the whole big bucket. They're supposed to track, like, you're paying the money should go to help what you're doing. That's the intention of that. The concept I would point out, and yes, it does look like we get quite a bit more money from fees, and we do get more than we do currently from state general fund. But I would also throw out there, not to sound like I'm biting the hand that feeds, but you guys would all appreciate this. The Blue Ribbon Task Force that was created in association with that 50-year vision process, their job was to basically, in the simplest terms, figure out if we were to pay for everything we needed for water, what would it cost every year? And their final tally was between 50 and 55 million a year. So we're sort of chugging along in a rowboat rather than the Queen Mary in terms of the funding level where we are currently, but we're extremely excited and grateful for the governor's recommendations that restore those two statutory transfers, because there's the one from state general fund that's supposed to be $6 million every year, and the one from EDIF that's supposed to be $2 million every year. And the last time they were fully funded from those two was 2008. And we're approximately $80 million in arrears if you add up every year. So that is wonderful. That's momentum. We're grateful for that. We're appreciative of that. That really shows a priority of moving in the right direction. But please keep in mind that all of this is a step in the right direction. But if we really need to do what Kansans need us to do, it's going to take a lot more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On the two you mentioned, pesticide and fertilizer fees, those are directed for cleanup. Right. Any further questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're still well below where we need to be as far as full funding of the state water plan and resources, and why is it said that Governor Kelly's plan fully funds the state water plan?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Well,
Can you rephrase?
Governor Kelly said that her budget fully
Yes.
funds the state water plan, but what you seem to be saying is that we're still way below where we need to be.
Right.
And so, is there a discrepancy there? Does her plan not really fully fund the state
Well, I
water
think
plan?
when we talk in terms of funding, and the Water Authority and the Water Office has also referred for years as fully fund, because it's an easier way to phrase it rather than give us a little. But it's the full restoration of the statutory demand transfers. And I think when you're making a description, and like I said, we do it as well internally, when you say, please fully fund the two demand transfers, that doesn't have the punch as fully fund the water plan. And I think it's not a misleading characterization at all. I think that's phrasing that's been used generally in pretty much all corners. And frankly, since we haven't gotten it in so long, to us it feels like fully funding. It's not really a misnomer. It's just, I want to make everybody aware that yes, that is where the statutes say we need to be. That's fully funding according to statute. But in terms of what's out there, then we're also talking about a grander scheme. So.
She's being very delicate. the legislature has not identified water as an area that deserves the attention that it needs. And so part of that is our fault for not going to the appropriations process and saying, this is what we have to have if we're going to fund the water in the future. So part of that's our fault. They've been asking for it, but they've been ignored, and we're going to deal with that. Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question because I like accounting. When you say that we're $50 million in arrears, is that what you said?
80.
80, where is that debt?
It went to pay for other things, I assume, because
So if the money wasn't in the budget, where did it come from? Sorry, I'm just.
it's not money we borrowed.
Okay.
We're not in debt to that amount. I'm saying am I getting at what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad you'd asked that because I don't want you to think that we're $80 million in debt.
That's the impression I have right now.
No, thank you. Had those two demand transfers, the 6 and the 2, had they been paid every year, they would have since 2008, there would have been $80 million more put into the State Water Plan Fund.
Okay.
Does that help clarify
We
that?
don't owe that money.
No.
Another program.
No.
We just didn't get to spend it.
No, it kind of got taken by somebody else from us. Okay.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Projects that were scheduled did not get done. Things that they wanted to do did not get done. So they didn't borrow the money, they just didn't do it. Representative Vaughn, you had one more?
Just a quick follow-up to go along with some of these other questions. So the $8 million demand transfer, the $6 million in SGF and $2 million in EDIF, when was that initially passed into law? And then has it ever been updated to reflect inflation or proportional increase in SGF or any other metrics, or has it been $8 million the whole time? Thank you.
It has never been enhanced. The amount has not changed.
Can the revisor or research answer the question when it was initiated, when it was put into law?
Sure. Victoria Potts with research. The first transfer took place in 1994.
No, but the amount has never been tied to inflation. It's never been changed. That was the initial amount. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Seeing none. Connie, if you would, introduce
Okay.
please.
Well, your next speaker is Don Bueller, who is the chair of the Kansas Water Authority, which is that advisory board I told you about. And they are responsible for a number of the things I explained to you, but primarily she's going to talk today about the annual report that they have recently approved. So I give you Don Bueller.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your information, Connie. Don, welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you again. I saw many of you in Garden City, and it's great to see you here back in Topeka. And I'm grateful to be here today, and thank you, Chair Hyland and the committee for the opportunity to present our annual report to the governor and the legislature. And before I get started on that, I would like to say thank you to all the folks back here behind me who showed up today. These are members of the Kansas Water Authority and also members of the regional advisory committees, and they represent all corners of the state. And we're here today to talk about water. So if you see them running around the State House, many of them made long trips to come here today, and we're really grateful to have them. All right, so first, before we dive into this, I thought I would just give you a brief update on the role of the Kansas Water Authority. And by the way, Connie did a fabulous job as always, so I'll try not to duplicate anything. The Water Authority is responsible for advising the governor, the legislature, and the director of the Kansas Water Office on water policy issues, and for approving the Kansas Water Plan, which Connie just talked to you about, the water plan budget, which we'll go over today, federal contracts, administrative regulations, and legislation proposed by the Kansas Water Office. The Water Authority provides the leadership to ensure that water policies and programs address the needs of all Kansans. All right, so we're ready to dive into this document. I'm glad you all have them in front of you today. Let's go to page 3 of the annual report. I think you all have already taken a look at this. And then you also have the additional page that Connie gave you of the budget recommendations that show the governor's recommendations. But I just wanted to highlight that this is the expenditure recommendations that the Water Authority went through, and Connie talked briefly about. We have a budget committee that goes through and looks at all of these expenditures. We also have, remember that members of the Water Authority include the ex officios, which are the agency folks. So they're also a part of this conversation. And so you'll see that there are subtotals for each of the agencies: Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Kansas Water Office, and then this year there's a line item for Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. So that is the expenditure page. We go through it in great detail with our budget committee, and then it is presented to the full Water Authority for approval, and so before it's included into the annual report. So are there any specific questions? I know that if there's a specific line item question, I may have to turn around to the back of the room, but anything on that portion? All right, let's move on. And we're going to take a look at page 2. So we're flipping back to the revenues. And again, Connie just talked about this briefly, but in our, the Water Authority made the recommendation for the full statutory funding of $8 million. And if you recall, $6 million comes from the State General Fund and $2 million from the EDIF fund. And so the Water Authority put in our annual report and our budget recommendations to fully restore that $8 million to the State Water Plan Fund. Now, if we take a look at the individual piece of paper that Connie passed out, we have the governor's recommendations. So I'd like to highlight that Governor Kelly has agreed to recommend full restoration of that $8 million in the State Water Plan Fund. And then there's also a line item here, it's in her budget, I'm not sure if it shows on this sheet, where she has also made a recommendation in her budget to pay off the bond payment on John Redmond Reservoir. Right now, if you look at the line items for, you find it here. So on the budget recommendation page, it says transfer to SGF John Redmond bond, $1.2 million a year. So that's the annual payment that is going out on that item. And the Water Office has calculated that in 2022, we have about $10.8 million left to pay off. So the governor has included that in her budget as an opportunity to pay off that bond. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is that there are other opportunities to pay down some state liabilities that could result in substantial savings into the future. So let's take a look at pages 12 and 13. And the page numbers are in the inside corners. Pages 12 and 13 really talk about the Water Office, the unfunded liability and comprehensive capital development. And basically, this is the storage for the reservoirs, and there is a balance due. There are balloon payments for these. And so there are opportunities to pay down some of this debt. I'm going to pull up a note that I have here. So if you look on page 13, we show Perry Lake Reservoir balance on due date of $49.3 million. Milford Lake balance due on due date of 37.9 million. There's one other reservoir, and the reason these two are listed here is because they do not have a corresponding income with them. So some of the lakes where we owe a balance due, they have an income associated with them where that it can offset some of that, but not all of it. And one of those examples is Hillsdale Reservoir. There is if we go to full maturity, it'll be 77 million. So these obligations on these three reservoirs, the Water Office has calculated that if we were to pay off these obligations in September of 2022, we could pay off 112 million, but if they went to full maturity, it'd be 164 million. So we wanted to bring that to your attention as well so that you could know that we have these unfunded liabilities sitting out there. They're big balloon payments, and you know, we all know in this room that we've long needed to fund these water issues, and these aren't that far away. I remember when I was, got my first job when I was 20 years old, and I went in to see the person for the retirement plan, and they said, well, you need to plan that you're going to retire in 2033. And I can remember thinking, oh, that's so far away. Well, it's not that far away anymore. It's getting closer and closer, and you look at the date here on these contract capital costs, and the due dates are 2041 at Perry Lake and 2034 at Milford. And so those payments are going to come due at some point, and we're going to have to pay those. So as you're grappling with all these issues across the state, there are so many within the water spectrum, we wanted to highlight that to you as well.
Time for a quick question. Representative Riley.
Yes, sir.
While you're on those debts, specifically for Milford Lake, so was that a bond issue that was put out by the state because they wanted Milford Lake, or was that a community bond because they wanted it? So who originally created that bond that we're paying for now, or will in 2031?
Okay. I'm going to have to turn around and look at the rest of the room.
Actually, these don't represent bonds, and they don't represent bond payments. These are contracts that the Water Office has with the Corps of Engineers, with the federal government, for storage in those reservoirs. So in simplest terms, there was a point in time when the state of Kansas was given the opportunity to have first dibs, if you will, on storage space in reservoirs. And that's way oversimplifying. But when those opportunities would come up, the state would say, we're locking it in. We have a chance to reserve some storage. That's water supply. We want to lock that in. We don't want to let that opportunity pass. The Water Office is the state entity for entering into those contracts. With Milford and Perry, we don't currently have any contracts for the use of that water. So with the other reservoirs, with our water marketing program and our other programs, we pay the federal government. We have a contract for storage of water, and then we turn around, because it's for water supply, municipalities, industries, then contract with us for water. And 2/3 of the state of Kansas gets their water this way. So with Milford and Perry, there is no current contract. We have no revenue stream. So the reason this is so imperative is with the other contracts, yes, these are not the only ones we have, but we do have incoming revenue to help service those contracts and our payment obligations. With these two, we don't have a current revenue stream, and Hillsdale has a very insufficient revenue stream right now. So what we're looking at is these are debts that we don't currently have a way to pay for. Does that help answer your question?
It does, but where I was going with that is, I mean, like in the case of Milford, does not the state make money off of Parks and Rec and other things because that lake is there? There's other streams of fees and income that's going on that lake, right? So
That would be a question for perhaps Wildlife and Parks, perhaps, again, someone else in the room, but that doesn't come back to fund these contracts.
water, nobody's buying that Milford water downstream. And so what you're saying is no city or anything buying that water downstream to have purchase of water quality or quantity downstream from there.
Right, and we're reserving it in a sense for the future, because if we were to be in default, if we can't pay for these, we lose the storage. So we lose the opportunity for future use of that water, if that makes sense. So the value of that is, and I think you can look across the West and say, would Colorado really like to have some future use available to them right now? Would New Mexico and California, and we have that opportunity to lock that in. And if we pay for these, Milford and Perry and Hillsdale soon, when we pay for that, when we're done paying for that, we have control over that. Right now, until that's paid for, until we call it into service, the Corps can do whatever they want with it. They can use it for their navigation plan and make releases or store it however they see fit. But if we pay it off so that Kansas owns it, then that's storage, a section of that storage of water that we control, not the feds.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It says reservoir water supply and sediment management. And we've heard a lot of talk about sediment. I guess my question is, what kind of sediment management are we doing, and how extensive and how successful is that?
So there are many programs, many in this document that deal with sediment transportation and trying to stop sediment from coming into our reservoirs. There are programs, so I'm just going to name a couple of them to give you an idea. But under Kansas Department of Health and Environment, there's a program called RAPS, Water Restoration and Protection Strategy. And that is a program where you work with landowners to install conservation practices that protect water quality and slow down the sediment coming into those reservoirs. So there are many projects like that. If you look at the conservation districts, they also work with landowners around the reservoirs and throughout the entire watershed. They work all across the state in all 105 counties. But, you know, their job also is to work with landowners to install conservation practices. It might be a buffer. It might be cover on the farmland. It might be cover crops. There are lots of different programs that can do that. We also do have a program in our budget under the Water Office called Water Injection Dredging, and it's often referred to as the WID. And that is a pilot project that the Water Office wants to do to try to get the sediment under control and removed from Tuttle Creek Reservoir. And that's a pilot project that hopefully will show us whether or not we could do it on a bigger scale, not just in Tuttle Creek, but maybe across the state. So does that answer your question?
Yes, I think that's what I was getting at, was the dredging, how much of that is being done. And I did read about the water injection dredging part. So is that any of that involved in Milford and Perry?
No. It's right now it's a pilot project to be done in Tuttle Creek Reservoir only. And I believe if it's successful, it may be able to be applied at other reservoirs. But we need to do the pilot test first to see how it's going to work and if it'll work. It's a partnership with the Corps of Engineers and the Kansas Water Office to pilot test this project. So I think we're all hopeful that it'll have some success.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Director Owens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Schmidt and everyone else, I would turn your attention to page 5 of the annual report, and it breaks down, it categorizes all those line items. On page 5, there's a color chart, so you can look and see, as you were asking, what programs address reservoir water supply and sedimentation, and it breaks them out that way. So that might kind of help you envision what you're looking at. Sorry to interrupt, thank you.
Okay, it's time for full disclosure. Myself, the vice chair, and the ranking member, we put together a document that we have sent to the appropriations chair and the ways and means chair in the Senate, where we, with Director Owen's help, we put together a plan for paying off those debts owed to the federal government. We have some money now, and so we're trying to put our face forward and say, look, if you spend a little here, we can save a lot later on. So that letter contains all of those, plus some other things too. But we've done that this week. They have it, and so they are aware. They both chairs have been asking for it. Leadership's been asking for it. And so for the audience, we're telling everybody it's time to start funding this. And so that's full disclosure. So please go ahead.
Can I do cartwheels? Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hyland, and the committee. I would like to just mention in closing that our legislative visits are happening today with the Water Authority and our regional advisory committees. As I mentioned, some of you will have meetings with them today. They're here to answer any questions you have. The regional advisory committees work on their specific area. There might be a small watershed or their specific part of the state. So they have really valuable local information about boots on the ground, things that are happening right in your hometowns and in your area. So I encourage you to take the opportunity, if you can, to visit with them. I would like to thank the Kansas Legislature for recognizing the importance of and demonstrating a commitment to water funding. The State Water Plan funds programs across the state to meet the goals of the state. And thank you specifically to the House Water Committee for highlighting the water issues and bringing some much needed attention. Thank you for serving the committee and for your service to the state of Kansas. Any other questions? Thank you.
Further questions? See none. Thank you. And
Thank you.
Those in the room that are on the authority or the advisory committees, if you would please stand, we want to thank you publicly for all the work you do. Thank both of you for your presentations. They were wonderful. Thank you much. Very informative. I'm going to ask Representative Vaughn to bring us up to date on what might be happening Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And officially, no longer might be happening, but definitely happening. And looking very much forward to our visit to Water One on Friday. I know a lot of the members of the committee have RSVP'd. So I wanted to invite Mike Armstrong, the General Manager of Water One, and Darcy Meese, who is the Director of Legal Services and Governmental Relations, if I got that right, for Water One. And they have been working with us to help organize this visit. So I was going to invite them to kind of talk more about what we'll be doing. And then I did want to share, and you all can share this as well, but the address where we'll be meeting. And then before I forget, we had a few individuals indicate that they are interested in carpooling. So if those individuals would want to stay after, I would be happy to work with you to figure out how to logistically make that work. So those were my updates, and I will go ahead and turn it over. Thank you both for being here, and thank you for your work on the Kansas Water Authority.
Thank you, Mike Armstrong, General Manager with Water One. We want to just say thank you for the opportunity to provide the tour. So we're going to be meeting at 10 o'clock sharp at 7601 Holiday Drive, which is the site of our Hanson Water Treatment Plant. We have a bus, so we're going to do a tour. the chair and Representative Vaughn said that you guys are really interested in seeing a lot of facilities and locations, and so we're going to focus on giving you a good full tour for at least 2 hours. So I'll let Darcy talk about the details.
So Mike covered most of the logistics. I think the important thing is that we're all ready to get on the bus at 10 o'clock because I have a pretty tight schedule planned out. So I'm going to keep you all moving. You might want to wear athletic shoes also. I don't know. It'll be a little bit chilly. We are going to see the river and most of our facilities outdoors. So I think we'll have a good tour for you. We have a good presentation planned. We have a lot of our subject matter experts. A lot of our engineers are going to help us out to really explain the process to you and whatnot. So if you have any questions, if you want to filter them through Lindsay to me, I'd be happy to get any more information out for you. But we're very excited to have you all over.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I can work with Tony to make sure that address gets sent out to everybody so that it's in your emails. And I just wanted to say thank you again for all the work you do, and we're looking forward to Friday.
Well, the committee thanks you for inviting us to come over and giving us this tour. Thank you very much.
And I did want to let the committee know not to put pressure on Water One, but we've requested some Kansas City barbecue for lunch. So hopefully while you're over there, you get to enjoy some of that as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything else for the good of the committee today? Anything from our virtual committee members? With that, we are adjourned.